Welcome to Pastor's Chat today. As we continue our introduction in the book of Philippians, today I want to think about the amazing circumstances in which this letter was written. When you look at the book of Philippians, you find it's one of the most joyful books in the New Testament. In fact, it overflows with encouragement, gratitude, and rejoicing. Yet the Apostle Paul wrote this letter while he was a prisoner in Rome. In chapter 1 of Philippians, you'll find at least 4 times he mentions the word my chains. In verse 7, verse 13, verse 14, and verse 16. And even in the introduction chapter to the church at Philippi, he's saying, my chains, my chains. He is a prisoner in Rome. And to understand how remarkable that is, we need to remember a little about the Apostle Paul's life. When you study his life, you go back to Acts chapter 9 and you find his conversion. But even before then, in chapter 7, you find him standing there when Stephen is being martyred. He's one of the instigators of the riot that had Stephen stoned. And then in chapter 8, you find him persecuting the church. But in chapter 9, you find him coming to know Jesus Christ on the road to Damascus. And yet after that, his life became a life of hardship and sacrifice for the gospel. Soon after his conversion, even there in Damascus, he began to preach the gospel. And when he preached, he made people angry. And even there in Damascus, there was a plot to kill him, and he had to be let down in a basket over the wall to escape from that persecution. In the city of Lystra, when you begin his first missionary journey in Acts 13, you find he was stoned by a mob and left for dead. In Philippi, where he and Silas were thrown in jail, they were beaten and thrown in prison. In Thessalonica, a riot broke out because of his preaching. In Athens, the philosophers mocked him. In Corinth, he was dragged before the Roman authorities. In Ephesus, a massive riot broke out that threatened his life. And again, he faced opposition, persecution, danger, and suffering for the sake of Christ. You want to read Paul's description of that in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Verse 23 and following, he said, are they ministers of Christ? Speaking about some others, he said, I speak as a fool, but I am more, in labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often. From the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I've been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness, in toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, and cold and nakedness, besides the other things that come upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches. Wow, what a resume that Paul writes. And so here at the church, as he writes from prison to the church at Philippi, in verse 12, he says something remarkable. But I would have you understand, brethren, that the things which have happened unto me have fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel. In other words, Paul was saying, what has happened to me has actually helped the gospel spread. So even in his imprisonment, he found an opportunity to tell people about Jesus Christ. The Roman guards were hearing the gospel. Believers were becoming more bold in their witness, and the message of Jesus Christ was advancing. So Paul had learned to see his circumstances through the lens of God's purposes. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Paul asked, how can God use this for his glory and the spread of the gospel? And that is the perspective that filled his heart with joy. The book of Philippians reminds us that joy is not determined by our circumstances. Circumstances change constantly. Some days are good, some days are difficult. Some seasons of life bring blessings, but others bring great trials. So joy is not based on our changing circumstances. Today we need to remember this simple truth. Real joy is not found in perfect circumstances. Real joy is found in trusting a perfect Savior. And that's the kind of joy that the book of Philippians is going to teach us about as we study through it the next few weeks. God bless you, and you have a wonderful, wonderful day.